Hi, folks. Sorry, looks like my camera was dropped for just a minute, but now everything looks okay. Okay, I'll check back with you now, and I hope you'll tell me if there are any sound problems or video problems. Okay, how's the sound? And how's the video? And hi, Karen Reese. Hi, Lana Dell. And hi, Devora. Hi, Alan Scott. And hi, Margot Shepard. Nice to see you all here now. I got my first like. Jim Rushford joined. Hi, Jim. Nice to see you. Karen says, I can see you and hear you. Thank you, Karen. Are there any echoes? Or is everything copacetic? Hi, Dave Phelps. And Amber Lee Grigo. How are you, Amber Lee? Nice to see you tonight. Okay, Karen, thank you for the information. Okay, so of course, this is a favorite topic of mine because I guess the need to talk about it comes up so often. Uh, it seems as though the progressives uh, who have ambitious programs for the federal government and the changes we need, okay, are always forced to talk about when we get into debates. A very early question, okay, which arises, is how you gonna pay for it? It doesn't matter how many times someone like Bernie Sanders is interviewed about the Medicare for All program or the Green New Deal or eliminating student debt. Uh, he gets the same question over and over again about how you're going to pay for it. Now, during actual debates, there's not really a lot of argument that goes on about this. It's not as if it seems to represent a successful attack on the spot. He usually answers it by pointing to uh, he'll tax this and he'll tax that, and that he can, tax the other thing. That he'll tax you, he'll tax me, he'll tax the guy over there standing under the tree, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And so everybody, kind of nods their heads and, says, all right. Sometimes he says, well, that's going to pay for itself because it's going to do this and it's going to do that and it's going to do the other thing. But, okay, no matter how many times he answers the questions, he's always got somebody else coming back, all new. Oh, Bernie, how are you going to pay for it? And Elizabeth Warren is getting the same questions. And Tulsi Gabbard gets the how you going to pay for it the question. For some reason, Joe Biden never gets the how you going to pay for it question when he starts talking about foreign policy and also national security programs. When he starts to talk about the kinds of things that he would like to do. For example, extensions to the Affordable Care Act. In other words, how he's going to improve that. He's got all kinds of ideas about how he's going to improve that. And of course, those ideas are going to cost more than the original program, but he's not asked how you're going to pay for it. Okay, so uh, so evidently, the people who don't want to see these programs actually passed do seem to delight in asking the question how you're going to pay for it again and again, okay, and again. So I thought it would be interesting if I went over how I would answer that question if I were in a debate such as the ones we've been seeing. Okay, what I would say is I'd say, well, look, I'm going to cooperate with Congress to get the money for a Green New Deal appropriated. I've estimated that over 10 years, $16.3 trillion is going to have to be appropriated for a Green New Deal program. So each year, Congress is going to have to appropriate roughly $1.6 trillion of spending on the average over a 10-year period. So the first step in paying for it is going to be for Congress to pass a congressional appropriation. And then that gives the Treasury Department the authority to spend its money, the money that comes into its Treasury spending account. It gives them the authority that they need to spend for the Green New Deal programs. So that's the way I'm going to pay for it. Now, that's the way we pay for everything now. So I'm not going to pay for this, okay, in a different way. I'm going to get a congressional appropriation, and then I'm going to order the Treasury to buy the goods and services it needs from the private sector to implement the program. And that's going to be it. That's the way the federal government always does things. So when you ask me how I'm going to pay for it, what are you really asking me about? I mean, that's straightforward. That's the way it always happens. So why are you asking me about this? What is it you don't understand? Congress appropriates the money, and then the Treasury Department starts to pay people or starts to let out contracts, and the government gets invoiced for goods and services, and the Treasury Department then pays people. So, what is it you're really asking me about when you ask how are you going to pay for it? I don't understand what you're asking me about. So now I'm going to ask you, my viewers, what do you suppose they would be asking me about? Do they really know what they would be asking me about? Why is the answer I've just given, why is that an answer that might be viewed as insufficient by the journalists or by people from the audience who are asking me that particular question? So I'm going to ask you to comment about this. How would people reformulate their question in a proper way to get at the nub of what they are asking me about? Because I'm going to pay for this in exactly the way Congress pays for everything. I'm going to get them to appropriate the money, and then I'm going to ask the Treasury Department to pay its bills out of the Treasury spending account. I mean, that's it. That's the way the government actually does things. So, what's the problem? Karen says they don't want to listen. They ignore the answer to make it seem like it's coming out of the average Joe's pocket. Silly. Well, yes, but what would they say? In other words, what would they say to claim that the answer that I was giving them was insufficient, okay, or inadequate? And Dale Weaver's joined, and Bonnie is joined also. Dale says, "Hi, Doc. Good evening, revolutionaries." Karen Reese says, "Approbation." Gigi Schaumburg has joined. Hi, Gigi. Nice to see you again. Karen Reese says, "Approbation like war, tax breaks, and foreign aid, to name a few. Why not for social programs? It's such a bunch of malarkey." I know somebody whose favorite term is malarkey. And Dale Weaver says, "I walked in late. What's the question?" How you going to pay for it, Dale? That's the question. I gave a simple answer. I said, I'm going to get the money appropriated, and then I'm going to have the Treasury pay off the invoices it gets from people. And Dale says, "Oh no, not the dreaded how you going to pay for it question. Not the dreaded how you going to pay for it question." And Karen says, "Yep." So I'm going to put the question to you again, dear audience. What would people reply? What would people reply to such an answer in order to claim that it was inadequate or did not answer the question? I mean, would they tell me, "Oh, you didn't answer the question"? And then how would they explain why they think I did not answer the question? I mean, what is the real point of the question? What are they trying to get at? Anybody got any ideas about that? Well, revolutionaries, I mean, so what if Bernie answered the how you going to pay for it question in that way, saying specifically, "Okay, look, what I'm going to do is work with Congress to get a Medicare for all appropriation. which is probably going to come in at about, let's say, to be liberal about it, it's probably going to come in at 2.7 trillion for the first year. Uh, and let's say the Congress is a Congress supporting me, so they'd appropriate the 2.7 trillion, giving the Treasury the authority to spend the 2.7 trillion. And then the Treasury would spend by paying invoices, okay, and by sending money to people who are entitled to get it under the Medicare for All bill. Uh, okay, and so that's what's going to happen. And Karen says, because they don't understand macroeconomics. I know that. But, and Dale says, what are they trying to get at? They're afraid the empire's lust for war might be in danger. Who knows? Well, I think at some level they know why they're asking that question. They have a point. What I want is for a progressive candidate to make them say that point out loud. So a rebuttal to their point can be given. I don't want the progressive candidate who's running to assume an answer and then give an answer to an unspoken question. I want them to get the questioners, the silly journalists who have asked that question 150,000 times, to say up front what they're really asking. Because I don't think they're asking how you're going to pay for it. I think they're asking another question. What do you suppose that question is? So, my beloved audience, what do you expect that question is? What is it you think they're really asking? Dale says, journalist equals corporate tools. They push the corporatocracy's view for fear of losing their gigs. I know, but what question are they really asking? How you going to pay for it is not a clear question. How you going to pay for it assumes there are set ways to pay for it, and those set ways do not illuminate how payment actually happens. And Dale Weaver says, Ed Schultz, Phil Donahue, et al., where are they? No, where are they now? Well, poor Ed is gone. He's just gone. And Phil, I believe, is still kicking, but retired. And we hardly ever see him. I think he's doing a lot of charity work, though. But it's true that a lot of our people are gone. Well, Crystal Ball has gone to the Hill. She's doing a very good job over there. She's obviously a Bernie Sanders supporter and is quite open about it. And Dale Weaver says, "Oh, Rachel Maddow was a bazillionaire. Go figure." Well, Rachel probably figured she had a family to support, and that was more important than telling the truth. Dale says, "Crystal is doing yeoman's work." Now, Crystal is very skilled at the commentary. She really is. And Sagar and Jetty is pretty cool, awful. I mean, you're pretty cool also. He doesn't sound much like a right winger to me. Constantly claims he's a winger. He certainly doesn't act like a typical winger. He's definitely the thinking man's winger, and nobody's fool. Okay, but that aside, what is it they're really asking? What is it they're really assuming? His name is Sagar Anjetti, and he is Crystal Ball's co-host. The co-host on, I guess the name of the program is actually Rising. And it's a program sponsored by The Hill, which is the long-standing publication on Congress that often carries opinion from across the spectrum, and that does go as far as Bernie and also Tulsi. That we cannot pay for it ever, asks but Karen. No, that's not what they're asking. I mean, I really have a problem. I don't know what they're really asking. I don't know if they know what they're really asking. They're assuming there's a problem there, but the truthful answer is, listen, if we have a majority in Congress, then the money is going to be appropriated, and then the Treasury Department is going to pay for everything. So what's your problem? What is it you don't understand? I think when they ask that question, there's something critical they don't understand. And that we could really get around this problem if we force them to verbalize what it is the people who ask that question do not understand. What is it they're really asking Bernie? Hey, Randy Hedgerbeth. Nice to see you. Okay, while I'm waiting for further answers, I'd like to point out that uh, I now have these streams up, okay, on my YouTube channel. And so you can access them again, okay, on the YouTube channel. and you can comment there, and you can share, like, and subscribe there. I generally put them up very soon after the Facebook stream, okay, is done. I tried at first to stream them both at once using the Restream.io software, but a problem quickly developed with that, and so I decided to go with the Facebook streams and then to quickly repost them up, okay, to YouTube. Dale says, I've seen discussions on the internet. Everybody digs it. I will not consider any point of view that differs from their own. And he says that modern discourse is a joke. Uh, well, I'd say modern discourse on social media, okay, is a joke. But apart from their digging in, and apart from they're not considering any other point of view, and that it usually deteriorates into name calling, then I would still want to ask, what is how you going to pay for it shorthand for? They're not really asking how you're going to pay for it because I just answered that question in the only way it can be answered. That they're not really asking how you're going to pay for it, because it's always paid for by Congress appropriating the money and by the Treasury Department paying the bills. I mean, that's what happens. That short answer is a true answer to what they're asking. So they're not asking about that. They're not really asking that question. I'll give you a few more minutes to come up with what they might be asking. Dale says, what can we do with people who have been indoctrinated and choose to remain ignorant? Yes, they don't really care about how you're going to pay for it. It's a catchphrase. It's a catchphrase, that's true, but as I indicated, it's a catchphrase that they don't understand. They don't understand what it is they're really asking. And therefore, maybe the progressive side doesn't really know what they're asking, and therefore doesn't really know how to give a good answer. When you don't know what people are asking, you're at a loss to give a good answer to the question. I also wanted to make the point here that how you're going to pay for it is an easy question to answer. They're not really asking how you're going to pay for it. Anybody else get any hunches? Yes, it's hard to respond unless you have the patience of Job. Well, maybe we can respond with the Job guarantee. Sorry, I couldn't resist that pun. And Randy sent me a like of this video. Thank you, Randy. By the way, please share, like, and subscribe. I know you can't subscribe on Facebook, but you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please do that. Dale says, Job guarantee, good one. And Karen Reese says, it's a trap. Yeah, it's a trap. And we fall into it by not giving the straightforward answer, okay, and then asking them if they don't just accept the answer outright, asking them, well, look, you've asked me a question, and I've answered the question. I've given you a straightforward answer, and it's a true answer to the question. So, what is it you're really asking me if you don't find that answer satisfactory? And Margot Shepard said, I don't think they're asking. They're telling you you're not getting their money. Well, that may be, Margot. That may be. That's what they're trying to tell you. But the people who ask that question are not saying that. What they're asking you is how you going to pay for it. And the correct answer is what I've given you. That's the correct answer. I'm going to get it appropriated, and then the Treasury Department is going to pay the invoices or pay the people who are entitled to get money under the Act. That's it. Hey, Rob, I was hoping you'd join because I'd like you to try to answer the question. I mean, how are you going to pay for it, right? Okay, so I answered the question very straightforwardly. I said, hey, I'm going to get the money appropriated for it, and then the Treasury Department is going to pay the bills. And that's the answer to the question. So why would the journalists asking the question have a problem with that? What is it they're really asking when they ask me how you going to pay for it? Or when they ask that question of Bernie? Or when they ask that question of Tulsi? Or when they ask it, okay, of Warren? Or when they ask it of anybody? What are they really asking? There's only one way the government pays for things. It appropriates spending money, and then it has the Treasury pay for things, and that's the way it spends. And Dale says we're going to pay for it by congressional appropriation authorization and crediting the appropriate accounts at the central bank like we do for all spending. How's that answer? Yeah, that's the same answer I gave. Roughly the same answer. I simplified it a little by not saying that we're going to credit the appropriate accounts at the central bank because some people won't understand what that actually means. But I think that's not what they're asking. I really do think that's not what they're asking. They're asking something else. I think if they're going to ask a question, it's up to the questioner to put the question clearly if they expect the respondent to actually give an answer to the question that they're asking. They're not asking how you're going to pay for it. Because that question can be easily answered, just as you answered it, Rob. Karen says people don't understand the fiat money. I agree. Rob says, if they don't understand that, then why are they asking, okay, in an arrogant manner? Well, that's easy to explain. If people from the mainstream networks, if they get paid $1 million a year or more to do a job, then once they've been holding down that job for a few months, they then quickly become very arrogant because, of course, they assume they're worth the $1 million a year, that they're worth having the money to enjoy all the good things that New York or Washington has to offer. That's why they ask questions in an arrogant manner. Because from their point of view, they're sitting on top of the world. Why shouldn't they be arrogant? They're at the top of their profession, quote unquote. I mean, Brian Williams, right? He's so professional. He's a professional at making up stories that aren't true. Rob says the pay for question is the greatest heist against the people. That's true. But what are they really asking? To answer the question well, to go beyond the answer that we both gave, we have to get what question it is they're really asking. Any other ideas? And Rob says, oh God, Brian Williams is nothing but a liar and furs in, well, in mainstream media. I don't think that's what you meant to write, Rob. That's just a theory on my part. So, anybody else have any ideas? Okay, so I'm going to hypothesize about what it is they are really asking. And Rob says, I think they're asking because it's their way of trying to stop a legislation in its tracks from gaining momentum because it will hurt the free market making a profit. Now, Rob, I generally agree with you about that, but I didn't ask you that question. I didn't ask you why they're asking that question. I asked you, what question is it they're really asking? Because you and I gave that answer. I mean, that's an obvious answer. Well, the money's going to be appropriated and the Treasury is going to pay the bills. I mean, Bernie's basically saying that to him. Now, when he gives an answer, he's basically saying, hey, we're going to pay for it the same way we've paid for anything else. We always pay for things in the same way. So again, what are they asking? What are they really asking? Okay, so I'm going to guess that they're not really asking how you're going to pay for it. What they're really asking is, when you cannot tax anymore, or when the tax collections slow down, as they periodically do during the year, okay, and when for the Treasury Department, I see something else coming to me here. Let's see if I can find out. So Randy asks, you getting my responses? This is the most recent response I've seen from you, Randy. Your question, you getting my responses? I haven't gotten any other responses. I'm looking at all the responses I've gotten on Facebook thus far, and I don't seem to see them. Rob has another response. He says they're ignorant of the economic system only because of the folklore lies they've been told, passed down, okay, from generation to generation. Yes, Rob, I agree. But again, what is it they're really asking? I don't know, Yoda. I'm all out of ideas. The last one for me is the hyperinflation. That may kind of be right, but I think what they're really asking is this. They're asking, Bernie, how are you going to pay the bills when Congress has appropriated the money, but the Treasury spending account is actually running low because the tax collections aren't keeping up with the spending, and it's necessary for the Treasury Department to borrow money in order to fund the deficit spending that you are proposing. Uh, and something happens to the bond markets. So, how are you going to pay for it then? How are you going to pay for it when the bond markets seize up? How are you going to pay for it when the debt ceiling is reached and the Federal Reserve will not top up the Treasury spending account in order to allow the Treasury to pay their bills? And Randy says, they are not asking, they are telling the candidate they do not accept their response before they answer. It is a ruse. I agree, Randy Hedgebeth. It is a ruse. There's no question it's a ruse. There's no question it's not a sincere question. There's no question about that. But my point is, they're not really asking how you're going to pay for it, because the true answer is you're going to appropriate the money, and then the Treasury Department is going to pay the bills. What they're really asking is, how are you going to pay the bills when there are obstacles, like problems in the bond market or debt ceiling problems, okay, that occur They may also be asking, well, what happens if you don't have a majority? But I think that one is easy to answer because Bernie is assuming, of course, that in order to pass a Green New Deal or to pass a Medicare for All bill, that he is going to have a majority in Congress, that he is going to be able to get the appropriation. And once he has the appropriation, the assumption is that it's automatic that since Congress is mandating the spending, that the spending will happen. So I think that answers the how you're going to pay for it question. So I don't think they're asking that question. They're asking a more specific question, which is once the normal procedures for topping up the Treasury spending account do not work because the debt ceiling is reached. It's because tax collections are slower than they were supposed to be. How then will you top up the Treasury spending account, Bernie? How will you get it topped up in those situations? But I think the journalists do not know that is what they really are asking. That's what's in the back of their minds. And that's what I think we have to draw out of them. We have to draw that kind of admission, that kind of clarification out of them. And to draw that out, we have to ask them, what's wrong with my first answer? What's wrong with I'm going to get the spending appropriated and then I'm going to have the Treasury pay the bills? What's wrong with that? And then they'll tell you, maybe. If they're knowledgeable, they perhaps can tell you, well, sometimes that won't work because you got the debt ceiling problem. And Rob says, I don't know, Yoda. You teaching me MMT, it's really hard to think in the antiquated way. So I blame and thank you at the same time, Yoda. Well, thank you, Rob, for putting it in that way. I appreciate that. Okay, so I think that's what we have to do to them. We have to get them to admit they don't find the answer satisfactory, and we have to get them to admit that they don't find the answer satisfactory because that's not really what they're asking. What they're asking is, what happens if for some reason the Treasury Department cannot get the Fed to top up the Treasury spending account so it can do the spending that Congress has mandated? That's the real question that lies behind this, and that they are not clearly articulating. If they did, we could give them answers. Case in point, what Bernie could say is, well, what I'm going to ask of the Congress to do is to appropriate the $16.3 trillion over 10 years on a year-by-year basis, of course. And at the time of the appropriation, I'm also going to ask the Congress to mandate the Federal Reserve to create the necessary credits in the Treasury spending account to spend the congressional mandate, to spend the appropriation. He could say that. He could also say, well, what I'm going to do in case of a seizing up of the regular procedures is I'm going to order the Secretary of the Treasury to mint $100 trillion platinum coin. And then I'm going to deposit that at the Fed, force them to credit the $100 trillion platinum coin, and then there'll be no problem. I'll have enough money in the public purse to spend the congressional appropriation and to spend to pay back any debt and any interest that falls due during the period of the appropriation. And he could just answer that question very straightforwardly. And when they ask, well, how can you do that? How can you get money added to the Treasury spending account without further taxing or borrowing? And then Bernie could reply, and he could say, well, look, it's easy. It's easy. Remember Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It says that Congress has the authority to coin money. The courts have interpreted this to mean that Congress has the authority to create money in the form of reserves, in the form of currency, or in the form of coins. That's the constitutional authority that's given to the Congress. Now, using that authority, Congress gave authority to the executive branch to mint platinum coins, leaving the face value of those coins to the discretion of the Secretary of the Treasury. And Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution also gives Congress the authority to order the Federal Reserve, which is a creation of Congress, to create the necessary money and to place it in the Treasury spending account. Excuse me a second while Bonnie asks me a question. So Bonnie says, they have been telling us for years what you can do and not do. And then when it looks like it is not working, then they ask. Well, that's a very good point. A very good point, Bonnie. Okay. So anyway, then once we get them to articulate what is their real problem with the straightforward answer of, well, we're going to appropriate the money, and then we're going to have the Treasury pay the bills. Once we get them to articulate what their problem is with that answer, then we'll be able to give reasonable answers to those questions. And the reasonable answers are, we'll order the Fed to fill the Treasury account, or I will simply use the authority that Congress has given me to order the Secretary of the Treasury to have the Mint create a platinum coin with a face value of, say, $100 trillion, and then we'll have all the money we need to spend what's been appropriated by Congress. We'll have all the credits we need to have the Federal Reserve credit private sector accounts to spend the appropriation. So Rob says, that's it? That's what they're really concerned about? Congress needs to get rid of the stupid debt ceiling and stop issuing treasuries, not completely though, because I want them to be sold to pension and retirement funds until we straighten out the pension retirement situation in this country. Well, I think there are other ways to do that, and we don't have to use that particular method. But nothing stops the Treasury from issuing Treasury securities just because there's enough money sitting in the Treasury spending account to cover any spending that Treasury wants to do. It can have that money in its account, and it can also sell Treasury securities. There's nothing stopping it. Article 1, Section 8 allows both. So Rob asks, that's it? That's what they're really concerned about? Well, not quite. What they're really concerned about is they used to thinking in terms of the following, in terms of the idea that things are paid for by the Treasury Department taxing private sector dollars and then transferring those dollars over to the Treasury spending account, and the private sector also buying Treasury securities, and then the Fed transferring those dollars over to the Treasury spending account. In other words, they're operating on the model that the dollars can only come from the private sector, that they can only come from the private sector, and that the government has to get those dollars from the private sector, and then it has to use the private sector dollars it's gotten to do its spending. They don't have in mind the view that the Treasury spending account is always topped up by the Federal Reserve creating new reserves to go into the Treasury spending account. That's the general way, the most common way in which reserves are added to the Treasury spending account. Now, there are some reserves that get in there through coin seigniorage, but it's a relatively small amount each year. It's something like, I think, I don't know, $600 million or something like that. I'm not sure of the exact figure right now. It's a small piece of change, not comparable to the federal budget. And also some money gets in because the government has sold some property or something like that, and then the proceeds get canceled out in the bank settlement process, and the Federal Reserve creates new money. Okay, essentially new reserves, which it uses to top up the Treasury spending account for the amount of the sale. In other words, people don't understand that the Federal Reserve is continuously destroying money or destroying reserves that are tendered in payment to the government, and continuously creating new reserves in the Treasury spending account. And that this is going on in a continuous process all the time. So, from their point of view, they don't see that there's no mystery here, that the Federal Reserve tops up the Treasury spending account when it has a warrant to do so based on its business rules or congressional mandates of one kind or another. So they don't see that that's what's involved here. So Rob says again, I read this before. That's it? That's what they're really concerned about? Congress needs to get rid of the stupid debt ceiling and stop issuing Treasury securities because I want them to be sold to pension funds. Yeah, I read that already. And Francesco Bacon, otherwise known as Francis Bacon, I guess. That's probably a nom de plume or something like that, but maybe not. I might be mistaken about that. Has joined. Anyway, Francesco, or Francis, as the case may be, thank you very much for joining. And has anybody got any questions about what I've said? To summarize, what I've said is how you going to pay for it ain't really what they're asking. And if we want to get to an answer that they may or may not find satisfactory, but which is the true answer, we've got to ask them get them to ask their true question. And not the question, how you going to pay for it, which we can easily answer. But which answer they won't understand. Because it doesn't answer the underlying question they're really asking. So, any other comments or questions? While you're thinking of any, I'm going to flash my please share, like, and subscribe screen. And also ask you to please become a patron at https www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. That's me, Joe Firestone. And now I'll check back to see if you've got any more questions or any more statements. Karen says, you made total sense. Thank you, Karen. Now we might ask a further question. Why is Bernie Sanders? Why is Warren? And why is Tulsi, when they're asked questions like this, why are they assuming that the answer to how you're going to pay for it is I'm going to tax and or I'm going to issue further Treasury securities? Why are they assuming that that is the answer to the question? Because that is not the answer to the question. That's an answer to a totally different question. Which question is, how you gonna drain money out of the private sector to make policy space for the spending you are planning to do? Because taxing and issuing Treasury securities is not about paying for anything. It's about draining reserves away from the private sector. That is its true function. And that point needs to be drilled into the heads of the journos, so they're asking proper questions during debates. Karen says, I now need to rethink my approach on how you're going to pay for it. Wish Bernie would say more or hint more about real macroeconomics. Well, Bernie figures that in this campaign of trying to win a primary, while it may be his function to educate on what is in the Medicare for All bill or what is in the Green New Deal and why these programs are so great, he may figure that it's not his function to educate the public on how the government actually pays for things. He may think that as a matter of education in a campaign, that is a bridge too far, and that it's not one that he can easily cross without really looking like without really getting the mainstream so crazy about what he's saying that they make him look like a fool in front of the public. And Rob asks me off stream in the background here. He asks, "Hey Yoda, you want to do a stream covering Andrew Yang or UBI, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and where does Bernie and the progressive movement go from here?" Sure, Rob, and we can do a stream on that. So Karen says, "I know it would hurt his campaign." Yes, it might hurt his campaign. And since he's not really being forced to answer the underlying questions, he probably figures, well, he doesn't have to answer them. He'll just say, I'm going to get the money appropriated and I'm going to have the Treasury Department pay the bills. And then say to them, hey, what else is involved? He probably thinks he can get away with that all campaign without getting into the educational questions. And he may be right. After all, Bernie is a master politician, and he has a very good sense of what the public is prepared to learn and what it's not prepared to learn. Karen says taxing the ultra wealthy is a big deal, which I'm not against that. LOL. Yeah, I agree, Karen. Taxing the ultra wealthy is a big deal. And I'm for taxing the ultra wealthy because I know that taxing the ultra wealthy is about draining their reserves out of the private sector economy. And that's a good thing because they have too many reserves and they've been using them to buy politicians. And I want to stop that. So I'd be for taxing them within an inch of their lives. I don't mind that at all. I just don't want to say it's because we need that money to do anything with it. I just don't want to say that that money pays for anything. That's what the taxing would do, drain their power. That's it. Any other comments or questions? I guess we went into this in a little depth, didn't we? But remember, this is the in depth show. It's the show in which we go in depth at things. We don't do 5 minutes or 7 minutes. We do the things we need to do so that you really understand. That's the point. Okay, any other questions? If not, we're coming to the end of a very enjoyable session. I thank you for helping me with your comments and your questions. I'll give you a few seconds to offer some more comments or questions. And if there are none, I will say good night for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with what I hope are some other stimulating issues. Undoubtedly, before too long, I'll be back again with how you're going to pay for it, because the sun never seems to set on that question. Even when you tell them, read Article 1, Section 8, dummies. Okay, Bonnie's laughing a lot in the other room. So I think she's having fun with this one. Okay, Karen, thank you again. And Margot says thanks. Um, um, See you tomorrow. And Rob says in class. Are you in class now, Rob? He says I can't ask questions. You can't ask any questions when you're in your class because your prof doesn't like questions. I used to be a professor. I loved questions. I learned that from a certain professor in undergraduate school who used the Socratic method to teach very skillfully. He was very good at it. Always talking MMT with professors who look at me with 19 eyes, very wide eyes, like they don't understand. They got really, really wide eyes. Like there's something of a delay in the broadcast, so you can't see my wide eyes right now. I've taken my glasses off and I'm giving you wide eyes, and my stream still has to catch up to that. There they are. There they are at last. Boy, that was slow catching up to that. Okay. Anyway, thanks again. I'm going to say good night now, and I'll see you tomorrow.